Hello everybody, it's me, Fee, or Fiona Timms, otherwise known as White Zulu, author of my autobiography of the same name, and I welcome you all to another chapter of my book. I do hope you're all enjoying my life story, and I must thank all of you for being such dedicated subscribers, especially those who have written such complimentary comments below my videos. They are much appreciated. I would like to point out that the previous South African flag hanging on the wall behind me is not a political statement. It is simply a piece of history in the background of my first 50 years of my life, being born and growing up in my beloved mother country, South Africa. My autobiography, White Zulu, is not a political commentary, and frankly describes my experiences of growing up with the Zulu tribe as my family. That flag is simply a piece of cloth signifying the history of South Africa. It was originally used by the Union of South Africa from 1928 to 1961, and later the Republic of South Africa until 1994. The road became a narrow lane with a mossy, high stone wall on our left and a small loch on the right, overlooked by a charming, sprawling homestead called the Bungalow, which was also Glencruitten property. We passed a gateway at the bottom of a long hill, just inside of which stood a charming stone cottage with crow-stepped gables and tall chimneys. "That's the lower lodge," said Fred. "We have tenants living there." After continuing for about a mile, following the endless wall, Johnny turned left through a great big pair of ornate iron gates, guarded by a 2-story stone gatehouse, a larger version of the lower lodge, on the left side of the entrance, and proceeded down a long, tarred driveway with masses of huge dark green rhododendron bushes on either side. They were so thickly planted they looked like towering dark green walls. My first impression of the house, once Johnny had parked the car under an archway beneath a bell tower and scuttled off somewhere round the back with our bags, was of a massive front door, through which we walked and into a cavernous hall with a fireplace big enough to roast a whole ox, and over which hung a pair of American bison horns, an indication of the Mackay connections to the USA. I hurried in from the drawing room and flung her arms around Fred. "Darlings," she shrieked hoarsely, "so lovely to see you." And she called for Stella, a member of the Glencruitten staff, to take us up to our bedroom on the first floor overlooking the gardens. I walked to the big window and looked out. "You can see Oban Bay from here, and the island of Kerrera," said Fred. "I can't see anything," I replied, peering through the mist. It wasn't even light yet. "I'm sure I'll be able to see the view once the sun comes out." Fred just laughed. "This is the west coast of Scotland," he chuckled. "You might catch a glimpse of the sun in summer, maybe," he added encouragingly. "You're joking." I turned to look at him. "Nope." We walked down the sweeping curved staircase and into the drawing room where Ba was drinking tea. "Come, Ferrier, darling," she never called him Fred. "I must show you around." And turning to me, she added, "We have lunch at 1 and we meet for drinks in the sitting room at 12. And with that, she was off to put on her wellies, that's gumboots, at the front door, with Fred following her rather reluctantly. I walked upstairs to unpack and then had a look around. We were on the second floor, and there must be another story above us, as I could hear the odd thump and bump above my head. Across the passage, I found a huge bathroom with a wonderful, enormous bathtub almost in the middle of the room, standing with its ball and claw feet planted firmly on the black and white tiled floor. The brass taps were big, clumsy-looking Victorian affairs with a complicated cylindrical system for the bath plug, which I never mastered the whole time I was there. The loo was equally old-fashioned and had a delightful long chain to pull. It reminded me of some of the dunnies on the Zululand coast, which were tacked onto the end of spooky beach cottage verandas as an afterthought, and whose exciting swinging chains we so enjoyed pulling when we were small, after running the gauntlet of bats which swooped low along the veranda, narrowly missing our heads and causing us to run, crouching and squealing and nearly wetting our pants. I wandered down the wide second floor passage and into a vast library, which also served as a chapel, complete with a big brass bell in the tower overlooking the driveway and a proper church pipe organ. The floors were carpeted with rich-looking Baccara rugs in glorious dark blues, deep reds, gold, and intricate black patterns, and the walls that weren't hidden by floor to ceiling by books, had delicately coloured stained glass windows. After looking around, I walked back to where I thought our bedroom was, but must have taken a wrong turn, as I ended up at an unfamiliar staircase. It wasn't the one we'd walked up. It had a dark brown carpet and was narrower and led to what I subsequently learned was the apocryphal green baize door leading to a vast cavernous kitchen, and beyond which was what the servants called staff in this country, I noticed. I retraced my steps back and took another turn into an unfamiliar passage, carpeted with a seagrass mat and led to a scullery, which appeared to be dedicated specifically to flower arranging. Its walls were entirely made up of shells, upon which sat many different shapes, sizes, and colours of vases. In the sink lay some fresh leaves and stalks, and 2 or 3 pairs of secateurs had been left on the draining board. I gave up hunting for a way back to the main staircase after a few minutes, and turned back, following the original direction back down the narrow passage, only to find a surprise Stella at the end. She was wearing a green penny and was on the way up the stairs with a bucket filled with cleaning rags and brass polish. "Oh, Mrs. Ferrier, what are you doing in this part of the house?" She seemed nervous. "I'm lost," I replied. "Och, I'll show ye the way back. This is the servants' staircase and leads down to the kitchen." I had to lie down on our big double bed, as it already felt as if it had been a long day, and I was almost into my 5th month of my pregnancy, which made me feel very sleepy at odd times of the day. I dozed off and was woken by Fred shaking me gently. "Miss expecting you to be punctual for lunch. She doesn't like to be kept waiting." He led the way down the main staircase and into a small and invitingly cosy sitting room on the ground floor, with big windows looking out onto the garden. There was a welcoming fire in the grate and soft armchairs with faded rose chintz covers, where Ba and Bob were sitting drinking martinis. Fred introduced me to a tall, very attractive and graceful lady who stood at the fireplace. This is my Aunt Elizabeth, but we call her Weenie or Tad. She extended her hand to me graciously and asked me how we'd enjoyed our trip. Zenny and I always sail across the Atlantic in the Mauretania every fall, with our cabin trunks in the hold. We simply have to get away from the Scottish winters, she said mysteriously. Fred, seeing my puzzlement, sidled over from where he'd been chatting to his parents and led me to a sideboard where a well-stocked drinks tray had been placed. She gets a bit muddled, as she seems to think we've arrived from South Africa by boat, he explained. Zenny, otherwise called Grace, their mother, is still in Florida and will be spending Christmas there, as she can't take another Scottish winter at her age, and the Mauretania was sunk during the Second World War by German subs. She always flies over to Florida these days. And for God's sake, don't let her mix you a martini. Hers are quite lethal. So I opted for a tomato juice, and we were called into lunch by Jimmy, the butler. The five of us sat and ate in almost total silence at an immensely long, polished table in an attractive dining room with a big bay window overlooking the misty garden. The walls were panelled in light golden-coloured oak, which gave the room a pleasant atmosphere in spite of the portraits of forbidding-looking Mackay forebears observing us from every wall. As we finished our rhubarb crumble pudding, Bob pushed back his chair at the head of the table and lit a big oily cigar, the smoke of which made me feel queasy, so I excused myself and left. I was on my way to climb the main staircase as Bob bustled out with a dejected, sorry, something's got to be shut down here. Go away. Apologies. And Fred in tow again. We dress for dinner and drinks will be at 7, she threw over her shoulder. I lay on our bed and read my book for a while until, to my surprise, I looked out of the window and saw it was pitch dark outside. The clock next to my bed said it wasn't quite 3 o'clock yet. So what was going on? I hadn't even noticed that it was getting darker, since there was very little difference in light between morning and just after lunch. Even in midwinter in South Africa, did not get dark until at least 6 in the evenings in winter. I must have dozed off again, as I woke to find Fred rummaging in the wardrobe. You'd better hurry and dress for dinner. It's nearly 7, he warned. But I am dressed. I looked down at my perfectly respectable grey tweed skirt and jacket. No, we dress up for dinner here. Black tie and long dresses. He pulled out a dark blue and green Mackay dress tartan kilt and a black dinner jacket and disappeared into the bathroom across the landing. Rather groggily, I stood up and looked in the wardrobe at the dresses I'd brought with me. Luckily, I'd managed to snatch a moment in London a couple of days before to be able to buy a long, warm, dark blue maternity dress, as there was no way I would fit into the other evening dresses I'd brought from home. I'm going to leave it there. This is just a taste of life in Glencruitten under the rule of Bar and Bob. I hope you enjoyed it, and there's plenty more. Thanks for listening. Thanks to John for being such an amazing sound engineer. I'll see you next week. Goodbye. That is all for the time being, and there's more to come next week. I would like to thank John Moslane for putting aside his Friday afternoons to help me produce these videos. Without him, I could not do this. I would also like to thank Sean van Vuren for his sterling work in uploading my videos to my YouTube channel, adding the photos, as well as managing my channel so professionally. If you would like to know more about my other works, I have written 5 books in all, and each one is autobiographical. Please visit my website at www.whitezulubook.com, where you will find a lot more information as well as plenty of photographs. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed my life story, and there is plenty more to come. A thumbnail photo will be attached each week, and thank you so much for all your support and all the very kind remarks you make in complimenting me on my work. I really appreciate it. Goodbye.